Mary Meet, Annie here. This is a stone casting video, and in this video I'm going to talk about the powers of the black and white cast. The black and white cast is something like this. One stone will be the representative of you and or anyone you're doing the working for. Remember again, I ask them to bring a stone that represents them with them to readings that I do. And 2 stones from your collection of stones. An extreme of shading is really good. You could use 2 very different shadings of river stone. I am using a quartz and an obsidian in the casting that I'm going to do for you. There's a lot to be learned from a black and white casting. It can be used at the simplest level by tossing your 3 stones onto your casting platform. If the lightest color stone is closest to the stone, which is you, it will be a yes in a yes and no question. If the dark colored stone lands closest to you, it would be a no in a black and white yes-no casting. But let's address that a little bit. The stone casts don't tell you yes or no. Anyone who has worked with any of the divination tools knows that we're not told the future. We're not told a fact that is absolute and definite. Because the reality is that if you work with divinatory tools, you know that we are capturing an instant only. The moment those stones have landed on your platform, it's different than it was from when you tossed them. Yes or no castings are deceptively simple. They assume you've done the work beforehand. You don't come tripping into a reading going, I need to make a decision, so I'm going to let the stones do it for me. No, you've spent time, you may even have spent agonizing time, thinking of the pros and cons of a situation. In the end, what happens is the stones are reflecting something that you knew already. You already had gotten to a place where the information was there, and you need to look at it from a fresh perspective. A yes, the white stone landing closest to your personal stone, doesn't necessarily mean go ahead with this, this is the absolute. It means at the moment that stone was cast, the things that you were thinking of that were along a line of yes were the most powerful in that moment in time. They take you into what you already know. They don't answer for you. You may find when you cast your 3 stones that neither the white nor the black stone, or your light or dark stone, is closer to your representative stone. Yeah, that's a big maybe, isn't it? Maybes really complicate a yes-no toss. And the reason they do is, maybe it could be you haven't done the work to get the options, the understanding of yes or no. It actually could mean not now. It's not the moment. This moment in time, considering everything you know about yes and no, it's not the time to go one route or another. A maybe cast is interesting because it gives you an awful lot more to think about than a yes or no cast did. Tell you what helps me a lot, because if this is a real common casting to make, this yes-no casting, it really is helpful if you cast the way I do, in an elemental fashion. Because what happens to me, reading for myself and reading for another, is if I get a maybe, and I'm like, oh crap, it's a maybe, I don't know if that means I or the other person has enough information, or whether the answer is it's not the time to make a decision, yes or no. What helps me is noticing where the stone representing self landed, and noticing what element it is aligned to. There's an assumption doing casting the way I do that you know your elements well, and you can get a pretty good idea, keeping in mind the aspects of the question that you're doing yes or no for, and where the stone landed, if you get a maybe, what you need to consider. Almost always, if I do a reading for myself, and it's a maybe, and my stone has landed closest to Earth, the answer is need more time. It's not the time to make a decision. If I get a maybe and my personal stone lands closest to fire, it probably means I'm too emotional and haven't gotten to a place of seeing clearly. If it lands in air and I get a maybe, if it's in the air quadrant, it probably means I need to get back to the basics. I've let it got too complicated. And if it lands in water, more than likely it's emotions again which are holding me back from making a yes-no progress. Not the emotions of fire, but the emotions of water, which might be that I'm not making a decision because I'm not willing to make a compromise, or I'm worried about compromising another. It has to do with the interplay of emotions with me and other people or another person. So when you get a maybe reading, the elemental aspects of how I do things can be really important. Another way to look at these black-white readings is action or inaction. In other words, not yes or no, but if you need a casting to determine if it's the time to take an action that you've been holding in your heart. Again, you could get that maybe. Almost always when you are doing an action or inaction casting, the maybe means you don't have enough information yet. I haven't run into too many times when I've needed to use the elements to try and figure out what maybe means for action or inaction. It just means that neither's the answer for now. Either time needs to pass or there's just not enough information at the moment. I'll just lay out a cast for you so you can see how I would interpret a landing of the stones when it comes to a yes-no, action, inaction, casting. I probably do this for myself and for others probably more often than any other thing, than anything else other than a purely elemental casting, and we'll get to that, or the single stone casting. Let me show you a couple of examples of the landing of a cast in the black and white casting. My elemental stones are on my casting field: earth, air, fire, and water. And what I have is 3 stones. I have a quartz and an obsidian, and then I have a river stone, which I'm going to use as the example of the stone of self, or the stone of whomever you might be doing the casting for. And let's do a yes-no example to begin with. As I mentioned, this is assuming the work has been done leading up to this moment, and this very moment and only this moment in time, to see what the stones ask us to focus on. So holding the question in mind that has an absolute yes or no, 2 options you have considered, 2 options in the way forward. In this particular casting, this is the stone of self, and much closer to it is the yes stone. If I had a casting something like that, in other words, the obsidian was as close as the quartz, I would, in this case, use earth as something which would help me to decide this no, yes that is looking like a maybe. I would look to earth to let me know why it is a maybe. We never have to settle for a permanent maybe. If you get a maybe in a reading, it is because something still has to come of it. So whether your stone landed where you were closer to fire or water, any other way it would land, use the element to determine why the maybe. And if I could remind you, when we work the field of casting, there is an invisible cross in the field of your working. You are working with quadrants of the elements. You never want to have a casting where you can't figure out if something is earth or air, or earth or water, because it seems like it's close to one or the other. You're working in a field where you have quadrants of earth, of air, of fire, and of water. Yes, sometimes something still lands on a border where you have to consider more than one element, so be it. When that happens, it just makes your reading a little more interesting. And I remind you too, if we were doing an action or an inaction, in other words, you have something in mind and you are casting for yourself to decide, is it the time to go forward with it or not? Same thing for someone you're doing a reading for and you drop the stones. In this case, closest to the self stone or the stone of the person you're doing the reading for is a action, a going forward. While we are casting, something I learned which was very helpful is if you do a cast and one of your stones takes a hike, it happens, doesn't it? So if I may, if that happens to you, and it does, may I offer you my counsel regarding that, and it comes from the teachers who counseled me. There can be a tendency when casts go awry and a stone or stones wander off the playing field to think that in itself has import. You'll discover if that's so for you or not. For me, it's not. And it's because I was taught it has no import, not regarding the stone itself. The rule I go by is if I cast and 3 times one of the stones goes awry, goes flying off of the playing field, it means not now, sister. I just took something out of Ernie's mouth. He finds things to chew on no matter where he is. So 3 casts that go awry, not now. It means either I wasn't prepared. If I'm doing a reading for myself, I need to think again about the reading. It's a little more awkward when somebody is waiting for a reading from you, especially if they're actually right in your physical presence. I've been frustrated by it just this very week. A dear friend has asked for a reading, and I am so glad to do one for him. Stone readings have been helpful to him in the past. So as soon as I could settle down to do one, I was all gung-ho to see what it said and send him off something. And 3 casts went awry. Okay, well, I've learned from my experience that means not that he's not in a place to hear the reading, but I'm not there. For some reason, I'm not going to give a good interpretation. So I'm all right with that. I tried again the next night. Midnight comes around the second night, and I cast the stones 3 times awry. Yeah, and then having a 3rd night in a row. Now, I might have thought when I was younger that that was an omen in itself. And that's why I wanted to mention this to you. It's not an omen in itself. It is one of the blessings of working with stones. This, you're ready, you're not ready, you're prepared, you're unprepared bit they tell you. There's a humility in working with the stones when it comes to being the one who does the cast. I'll try again in another day to do that casting for my friend. And eventually it will work well and he'll get the reading he needs. I can guarantee him that if I had done the reading, forced it until the stones all stayed in the casting field, it wouldn't have been a true meaning. I doubt it would have had meaning for him at all, or if it did, it would have been, where the heck is she coming from? None of that is resonating with me. I wanted to mention that because you're going to lose stones. They're going to go flying off no matter what you use as your surface. It doesn't happen too often because you get used to casting within the field you've set out for yourself. But when it happens, don't think it's some big lightning bolt telling you uh-oh, or that there's import to the stone that fell off. Certainly you would be tempted to think that. But I'm sharing how I view the miscast for you to consider when it happens to you. Now, one of the challenges I have when I do a casting, if it's a miscast, is if a stone goes rolling off, one guess whose smushy mouth the stone goes into. So I hope that gives you an idea of a place to work from when it comes to yes, no. Maybe action, inaction, or gather more information. The power of using 3 stones, and also a bit of the reason why I work in alignment to the elements when I do this. They're extra shading to this, which from what I have seen of the way other people cast, it seems to have been common to the people who taught me, but not as common out there. That it's worked from an elemental perspective. You can certainly make use of all the casts that I am illustrating over time in this series without a deep understanding of the elements, but I am sharing my version of stone casting, which is highly influenced by the elements. I'll be offering more suggestions on what castings can be and how to interpret them as we go forward.